You're like, they've been waiting. Got everybody? Chief's here? Okay. All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for my monthly media briefing. This is an opportunity to highlight the administration's efforts on some of the top issues facing the city, give you a preview of the month ahead, and, of course, take questions on any subject you all are interested in. With me this morning, we have Police Captain Sean Takeuchi, our Deputy Chief Operating Officer, Christina Peralta. We also have Assistant Police Chief Bernie Colon here this morning as well. As you all know, this week we began enforcing the Unsafe Camping Ordinance, which was passed by the City Council back in June. This ordinance makes clear that camping is prohibited on public property and makes it illegal at all times to camp within 2 blocks of schools and parks, shelters and transit hubs, canyons, and along waterways. Signs began going up last week in parks and at schools, starting with some of the areas most heavily impacted by encampments. And we've said in all of our communications in the lead up to this effort that we do not anticipate major changes happening immediately on the state of our streets in the areas where encampments are prominent, but we do think that with consistent contact, unhoused people will consider accepting offers of shelter. As a reminder, the goal of the Unsafe Camping Ordinance is to get folks off the streets, where for the most part they are not moving towards resolving their underlying causes of their homelessness and are living in extremely dangerous situations. Our progressive enforcement model continues to offer shelter to all those at every contact made by our officers. In the first 3 days of enforcement, officers made contact with 30 individuals who were violating the Unsafe Camping Ordinance. 3 arrests were made. All of those were for outstanding warrants. 2 citations were issued, and 3 people accepted placement into our shelter system. I will note that one of those 3 people who accepted shelter did so after being cited for a violation of the ordinance. Captain Takeuchi can take additional questions you might have about enforcement in just a moment. I want to remind individuals that there are places for folks to go. We have space available at our safe sleeping site at 20th and B, which last night served 111 people in a total of 93 tents. Residents have on-site showers once per week and continue to be transported to off-site showers twice a week until we can secure a mobile shower operator who's able to come by the site 3 times a week. Clients at the site work with their caseworkers for many of their needs, but what the site primarily offers is sanitary bathrooms, meals, water, and the relative safety of 24-hour security with tents and cots. We also continue to expand our shelter capacity, which in the short term includes adding beds at a few of our existing shelters and the continued development of safe parking lots, as well as the opening of a second safe sleeping site this fall at the O-Lot. In addition, this month we'll be opening our new family shelter at the Travel Lodge in Barrio Logan. All of these are designed to be a step towards gaining access to services that ultimately will lead to the placement of individuals in permanent housing. Now, of course, the transition to permanent housing requires that there actually be housing available, and I want to highlight some of the efforts that we're making on that front. In January, just before I delivered the State of the City address, I signed an executive order to dramatically speed up the building of affordable homes by directing our Development Services Department to reduce review of 100% affordable projects from around 6 months to 30 days. To their extreme credit, DSD stepped up and met this challenge, ramping up resources and finding efficiencies to speed processing times. As a result, we have 628 homes under construction or about to be so in Encanto, Claremont, and Rancho Penasquitos. We have another 11 projects in the pipeline under this particular program that will add nearly 1,300 additional affordable homes in our city. Speeding up the timeline for review also helped these projects meet critical state funding deadlines, which help to make them more financially feasible. Now, some of you may ask me, when are you going to do this for all forms of housing? And the answer to that is that we do intend to extend this to all housing in the city, and you'll have to stay tuned on that particular front. We have a number of other important programs designed to speed up housing production in our city. My second housing action package is going before the Planning Commission later today. Now, there has been a lot of attention on one component of the housing action package, specifically SB 10. But I want to draw the public's attention to a few less attention-grabbing but potentially high-impact incentives and proposals that the Planning Commission will consider later today. These include off-campus student housing incentives, allowing the development of private dorm-style student homes near transit and near universities. SRO incentives that encourage the preservation or creation of single-room occupancy homes which have shared kitchens and bathrooms and can be a staple for very low-income housing that have been good for seniors, people with disabilities, and other folks that are vulnerable to homelessness. Anti-displacement measures that preserve existing affordable housing while protecting residents from displacement caused by new development. And this will complement the recently adopted Tenant Protection Ordinance. AB 2097 implementation. What bill is that? Halverstadt may know, but let me let you know. This implements a state law and gives residential and commercial builders within a half a mile of a major existing or planned transit stop discretion on how many parking spaces to include in that project. Again, that's AB 2097. Accessible dwelling unit incentives that encourage granny flats that are accessible to people with disabilities. This is an amendment to our existing ADU home density bonus program, and again is intended to make homes more accessible for the disabled. And finally, incentives to build homes on public land, which provides public agencies like our city's Housing Commission and our local school districts greater flexibility by increasing allowable density and allowing affordable home developments on the land that they own that is zoned commercial or residential. Now, again, none of these individual measures can solve our housing crisis on its own, but taken together and combined with other state and local incentives that are already in place over the last 5 years, we can make a real difference in our housing crisis. Our homelessness crisis will continue to grow as long as we have a severe housing shortage. So I'll ask you to remind you and your readers and your viewers of the stakes of our efforts to create more homes across the city. With that, I'm happy to answer questions that folks may have.
How you're defining shelter availability. So in my own analysis of availability on a given day, there's usually about 24 beds total available, and then they get filled up by noon, is what the Housing Commission has said. So how is the city defining what's available when obviously there's also outreach workers in addition to police that are vying for those beds for their clients?
Well, Lisa, I get weekly reports on our housing or our shelter availability. Never has anyone given me a 100% number, right? Our system always has some level of bed availability, as you mentioned. There's a churn in our shelter system where folks enter the system and then exit. I'd like very much to reduce that because I know that when folks stay in the shelter system, their case managers can work with them to address the underlying causes of their homelessness and get them graduated into permanent housing. So some of that, I think, is what you're referring to. But it's a free country. Folks come and go. Point is that when beds are available, we expect people to use them.
But when the city is going out and deciding we can enforce, even outside of the sensitive zones, how is it saying we have available beds? How is it defining that? Maybe is a better way for me to ask that.
I may ask the captain for some help, but Lisa, if there's a body in the bed, it's full. If it's not, if there isn't one, it's available. Does that make sense?
Yes, but I think what I'm saying is there a certain number of beds if we know, the Housing Commission outside the HRC, people are lining up trying to get beds, there are outreach workers, how many beds have to be available and possibly where for the city to decide we can enforce the camping ban all throughout the city right now?
The answer is one, but I'll ask the captain maybe talk some more about the enforcement component.
I see where you're coming from, Lisa. As you know, hour by hour, the availability of beds can change. It's because it's a community that's not fixed in a location. We don't hold them hostage, if you will, right? They are free to go. And so the Housing Commission constantly evaluates the entire network of the beds. And unless I get a call from the Housing Commission or an email, like the mayor said, if we get an email saying there are no beds available, and that did happen, for example, during the COVID time, where it's a complete shutdown of intake. To me, in my mind, there's availability of beds. Now, is it a bed that's suitable for the person we are speaking to? We don't know, right? We have no idea. You're aware of the top bunk, bottom bunk issue, right? And so I rely on the information I get on a daily basis, which is there is availability in our housing network. The added benefit is 20th and B. 20th and B, I talk to Director Sarah Jarman of the Homelessness Strategies and Solutions every day. I have every day this week. And so she has assured me, and it's been proven fact, when we call, we are able to get someone into that shelter. So unless Director Jarman calls me and says there is no site available, the presumption is there are sites available and they can intake. Now, when you get into the nuanced specifics of what you're asking, well, how do we know for that particular person? We don't. We truly don't. If I know that 20th and B is available, for example, but that person is not open to 20th and B, well, in your view, it could be that's not an available shelter. In my view, I take the opposite. It is available shelter, but it's not what that person wants. We can't address every single situation, but generally speaking, that's how I know that beds are available. And I can't get to the specificity of what you're asking for because we don't have a system in that manner.
If someone wants to go to 20th and B, for example, if it is in violation and current violation of the ordinance, how does that individual get there? Is it up to them to walk or figure out how to get there? Is there some sort of transportation for that individual?
Yeah, so if they come in contact with a San Diego police officer and they're asking for 20th and B, my officers will make every effort to get them to 20th and B, and we have a method that's set up that we've been utilizing for the last 3 days. If you're just asking for the general public, I would encourage people to look at 211 and contact 211 to facilitate intake into 20th and B.
While you're up, just to save you a couple steps. So another thing that I've been trying to understand is the training that officers are getting.
Mhm.
You know, there's, as you know well, there's a lot of confusion on the streets right now too, and different officers say different things.
Yeah.
So I had done a PRA for the training bulletin
Mhm.
and was told today that there's not a responsive document. So what sort of training is there? Is there a training bulletin guiding what we need to look for, you
Yep.
know, as officers to see that there's a public health and safety issue, you know, progressive enforcement, et cetera?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's my responsibility to draft that training bulletin, and it's currently I'm drafting it, and then I will have to submit it through the process that we have in our organization for making sure that all the information that's required is in there. And so that process still has not been completed, Lisa, and that's why there's no responsive documents. In terms of how we're enforcing it without the training document, I have the luxury of being the commanding officer of the neighborhood policing division. So I have officers that work directly for me. So I met with a group of five officers that have been conducting enforcement in the Balboa Park area, and it was one-on-one training that I provided and I was responsible for. I do have a draft training bulletin, and so I use that as my guide, if you will. But it was easier for me to directly train my folks. So currently, a general San Diego police officer does not understand the ordinance, like you said, does not have the training to enforce it, and therefore they are not enforcing the ordinance. It's only my officers under my command that are currently enforcing it. As I get comfortable with the enforcement methods, with the intake process at 20th and B, I'm preparing to scale up enforcement as we identify more and more parks and schools. Then by that time, I'm confident that the training bulletin will be information for the entire police department, and every officer will be available. I want to give you a specific example of a difficulty I'm having. My officers are able to call coordinated intake and call 20th and B, right, for intake. However, I don't think that system can handle officers from various parts of the city calling in all at once. And so that's a part of, I've got to be careful, because in my training bulletin, I've got to guide a standard police officer that may be working down by the border. If they encounter an individual who wants housing, how does that person deal with it? And I just can't have, 900 officers calling in coordinated intake, because that would crush that system. So that's an example of why I need to be very careful.
And just to clarify, based on your comment before, has enforcement only occurred in Balboa Park of this specific ordinance so far?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Right now, only 5 officers are currently enforcing.
That's correct. It's currently my 5 officers, but I am leveraging park rangers to assist us, and I am also looking to the Balboa Park Central Division is that policing area. They have a Balboa Park team, and so I'll be bringing in the Balboa Park team effective today. And I'm looking at I need additional support, and so I'm looking at those entities to support us.
So could they be writing citations or giving warnings related to that starting today then?
I can't speak about the park rangers, but the Balboa Park policing team, when I meet with them this afternoon, yes, because I'll be training them.
With Balboa Park, that doesn't include downtown. I'm a little confused as to the enforcement that has happened this week.
Mm-hmm.
Is it throughout the city of San Diego, or have we started in a certain area? If you can just kind of go back a little bit.
Sure, I'll remind everyone what I presented to council is that when this ordinance is approved and we begin enforcing it, will start at parks and schools first. So we are strictly looking at parks and schools that have been impacted by homelessness, that we've received a lot of community complaints on. And so this past 3 days, and then today being the 4th day, I am looking specifically only in Balboa Park. So your question about downtown, parts of Balboa Park is in downtown, so it's hard to say, but Balboa Park is the geographical area that we are conducting enforcement.
I have a question for Mayor Gloria. There's been some concern about the proposal that the parking lot of the Knoxville Library to open the space for inside for people living in their cars. What's your reaction to residents that have some concern of school signs and saying the city's trying to stifle that type of thing?
Yeah, I'm happy to try and answer that. First off, it's currently a proposal, but I think what's maybe missing context in what you just said is that there are people sleeping in their cars in that parking lot now. What they don't have is the benefit of services that could actually help them get out of their cars and into housing. And so when we see that that's already occurring in that community, I think it makes sense. The city has that property. We believe we can do it in a way that's discreet and respectful, would have the services and the security that I think would be really important. I would point out that our safe parking lots are generally north of the 8, and so this is an area where we could have a little bit more offerings because we do have unsheltered individuals either outside of their car or in their car. A reminder that when folks access these services, they become much more successful and much more likely to get off the streets. And if you're interested, or any of the members of the media here are interested, my team can put you in touch with folks who are in the Claremont community where we opened the most recent new safe parking lot, and the reaction in that community, which has been extremely favorable. We have to spend the time now educating the community about what this would look like and be. Some of my staff that have gone out and met with community groups have detected misunderstanding. This is not a proposed safe sleeping site, like what's at 20th and B. It's a safe parking lot, very different. That this would not just be unregulated habitation of cars in a library parking lot. It would be regulated. There'd be security. There'd be services. It would be when the library is not open. And I think as we have those conversations, we're much more likely to be successful and address some of those concerns. I think those same people who have those concerns also have extreme concerns about the number of homeless individuals in their community and the impacts that has on them, on their children, on their surrounding neighborhood. And so we owe it to them to provide more services, and that's what we're going to do. Reminder, this is just one of many proposals. Refer you to our city's comprehensive shelter strategy. So there will be more of this. You will likely do stories about other neighborhoods in the city that will have these same concerns. I've seen and I've heard it before. But most of the time when we introduce one of these homeless solutions in a community, the community improves. Everyone was happier when the Old Central Library was turned into a shelter rather than a vacant building, getting folks off the sidewalk and into that property. We can do something similar at this location and other locations. And what I know is when people are in services, we're more likely to end their homelessness. That is our objective. I think no matter where you stand on any of these questions, we can share that as an area of common ground.
Mayor, where is the city at right now in perhaps having an app available for enforcement officers that can link up to available shelter beds and different organizations? I know you touched on this, I think, a couple of months ago,
Yeah.
and that was in the works.
Can you speak to that?
Sure.
Yeah. I'll ask Ms. Peralta to do that.
Thank you. So we are exploring several options right now. We have conversations ongoing with several groups and also looking at whether or not we can leverage some of our own city talent to develop it in-house. So there are several conversations going, and that's the goal, to have a single point app that folks can utilize to connect themselves to services and available shelter.
Sorry,
Sorry.
thank you. Elizabeth, if I can add, I want to remind you and thank our district attorney, who, as you may know, has been working for quite some time now to develop an app of her own. And the benefit of that is be countywide, be regional. And so what you'd have is the ability for some of these other cities to start putting up solutions of their own rather than parking their unsheltered individuals in our shelter system. I'm hopeful that she's successful in that regard. I know she's committed a lot of time and resources to make that happen. The city will be a partner with that. But I see the value in that is taking these other jurisdictions, some of whom are starting to open new shelters, new one in Oceanside. There's a proposal or an application for one in Chula Vista. So we're seeing some signs of life. But I think the county district attorney's effort to try and regionalize this would be extremely beneficial. Hopefully that means people who raise their hands in jurisdictions that are not the city of San Diego could find their way to a shelter that is in a city other than the city of San Diego so that we can continue to address the unsheltered people within our own city limits. Yeah.
Even unrelated to the enforcement in Balboa Park, are you able to say in general if demand and requests for shelter beds in the city is going up since the camping ban enforcement began?
Sean may be able to know that, but I think a nuanced piece that's in there is the reminder that we have constantly been enforcing the law in the city. I think that's really important to mention. Yes, we have this new tool of unsafe camping, but there are other ways that we can enforce the law, and so that work is ongoing. So I think what Elizabeth was maybe referring to a moment ago, it would be for other violations, but I think anecdotally we are hearing more requests. I think some of you have done reporting of folks who said, okay, I'm going to finally avail myself of shelter, and that's a good thing. That's something we should all celebrate and encourage. That's one of the intents of this particular legislation, to encourage folks to accept those services because we know it's safer for them and it's more likely to end their homelessness. But I don't know if Sean or if Christina have anything they can add to that.
Yeah, real quickly.
Okay, Sean.
When my officers first went on Monday, their comment to me was it was less homeless individuals in the park. And having conversation with Director Jarman from Homelessness Strategies and Solutions, she was saying that obviously extensive outreach happened at that park before enforcement went in, because that's part of the plan. And they were surprised because they were able to connect with a lot of people and have them accept 20th and B. So I think having 20th and B as an alternate type of living situation, not a bunk situation, versus having an open space, I think is anecdotally I can say I think groups are more receptive to that.
Well, I've certainly heard a lot of interest in Safe Sleep myself, but I am wondering, once 20th and B fills up, it's only 136 tents. We're at 111 people, I think you said, 93 tents.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually that's going to fill up. Do you see things changing a bit once that fills up?
It's 146 tents. 30, sorry. So back to your previous question, 93 tents, 136, we got some capacity. You heard me mention at the beginning of the conversation, we're working currently on OLOT. I'm sure you probably took a look at it. You've seen progress is being made. Ms. Peralta and her team are working hard to make sure that that's available. Our commitment is to open that this fall. That is substantially larger than 20th and B. It's going to be a heavy lift, but this is how committed we are to increasing services in our city. If 20th and B is full, that's a good thing. That means people are in care, they're going to get services, and they're more likely to end their homelessness. And the good news is I hope shortly after that may happen, the OLOT will open. That's in addition to Travelodge. That's in addition to the new beds that we're squeezing in some of our additional shelter spaces currently. So we've been relentless for 2.5 years now in trying to expand shelter opportunities. Nothing has changed. If anything, we're getting more aggressive about it. And I look forward to visiting with all of you as each of those come online, so you can see for yourself that there are opportunities and options for individuals to get off the streets.
On that point, thanks for the update. I was here for the last press conference,
Mm-hmm.
and there was an issue about whether or not showers were available
Mm-hmm.
on 20th and B. And before we were told there were, and we clarified during the press conference there weren't on-site showers.
Mm-hmm.
After your press conference, I asked if I could go tour it.
Mm-hmm.
And I offered to not take pictures and not invade their privacy. The staff said no.
Mm-hmm.
They said it was up to the provider. I went down there, the provider said no. So then we posted online that we were denied access. We just wanted to go verify
Mhm.
the conditions, the heat on the asphalt. Your chief spokesperson, Rachel Lang, responded to us saying that we could go on the hillside and look down,
Mhm.
like from far away. And her comment was, the only thing you can't witness from the outskirts of the hillside is inside people's tents, which you damn sure shouldn't expect.
Mhm.
Which obviously we wouldn't expect, right? And a few minutes later, your deputy spokesperson tweeted out in response to us, and I want to make sure I get this right. I know this is going to be hard for you to swallow, but you're not special.
Mhm.
We weren't asking for anything special. We were asking to confirm what you and your staff had said the conditions were. Do you think that's an appropriate response, not just to the media, but to the public? And you haven't, it's been a month.
Mhm.
We left our name and number for someone to call it. Nobody's called it. And you just offered right now that we go see the OLOT is done.
Mhm.
Is it too much to ask for us to go and verify the conditions? Do you think it's an appropriate response? What's your response?
So I think we should always treat anyone with respect and with dignity, but I think that also includes our homeless population. And what we've heard very clearly from the provider at 20th and B is that they would like to maintain some level of confidentiality, of humanity for those folks who are accessing services there, to allow them the privacy to address their underlying concerns and causes. We'll continue to work with them. I think there may be an opportunity in the future to invite folks of the media to come and see the site, but we defer to the experts in this field, which feel, at least in this initial phase where we're ramping up, where they are going from nobody there to, as you heard me say, over 100 people there in less than a month's time, or about a month's time. This is a heavy lift, and the focus ought to be on the folks who are vulnerable, who are sick, who need help and services, rather than prioritizing, photo opportunity.
We were looking for a photo op. You think it's inappropriate for the media to ask to go look at a publicly funded site where these people were living on the street 15 minutes earlier?
A reminder that we did do a media availability at the site prior to the.
People were there.
Correct. While many of the offerings were on site, and we've been very clear that these will continue to be added over time. A reminder that we're still living with many of the challenges post-pandemic around workforce, around supply chain, around availability of items.
So your policy is the media is not allowed to go to verify these sites?
I can't help how you're going to write this story, but our policy is, I'm standing before you right now answering questions. This is not the first or the last time that I'll do that. We had a media availability on the site. Members of the media have interacted regularly with residents on their own terms. But with regard to accessing the particular site, the folks at Dreams for Change have asked for some ability to control that access for the time being. I believe that eventually they will invite folks in, and we're going to work with them to do that. But I'm going to defer to their expertise, and what they know is they're dealing with people who have been heavily traumatized, who deserve some level of confidentiality and privacy as they address underlying significant, serious trauma, and we'll do that. Will you have an opportunity to get there eventually? I believe you will. Reminder, we have held events at many of our sites as we've opened them to allow folks to see. Safe parking lot in Morena, we were there. Opening of the Central Library, did that. Travelodge, we've been on site. Seniors Landing, been on site. You've been at many of those places. So we have been doing that, but we have to balance that with the privacy expectations of individuals who are heavily traumatized, who we're trying to encourage to come into care, and for whom they may not be in a position to welcome interviews with folks. But again, I've seen many of your coverage. You all have done plenty of stories. You've told the stories of folks who have said that this is safer, that they feel more comfortable there, that they have some feedback, and we have been accepting that feedback and adjusting as in due course. We'll continue to work to get this right. What I know for sure is that 20th and B is a lot better than the sidewalk. And many of the quotes have said that. Mm-hmm.
I have a question that may be of interest to others that's
Mm-hmm.
not related to what we've been discussing.
Mm-hmm.
City Hall redevelopment.
Yeah.
My pal Andy Keith had scoop this morning about the city not receiving any bids for the 5-block radius. I'm wondering what your take is on that and what this could potentially mean for the affordable housing component of this.
Well, I think we'll have more to say after the deadline comes in a couple of days. I will tell you that regardless of the outcome, the city is absolutely committed to driving change on this site, not just to address the significant taxpayer liabilities associated with the existing buildings, but to create a lot more housing, affordable housing, to help us address our crisis here. So I read the reporting. I'm aware of those circumstances, but I think it's a bit early to say who or what will bid. But whatever may happen, we will deal with it, and we'll move forward. As was mentioned by Jay Goldstone, I think in his interview with Axios, the city is committed, and there's the ability to perhaps have a few more options to work with this site if that comes to pass. But we're not there yet, and certainly when and if we get to that point, we will be in touch with everybody to explain what our next steps will be. But the status quo on this site is absolutely not acceptable. It is not an appropriate location for the public to access their government. It is a liability to taxpayers, and it has the potential to generate a lot of homes that are affordable to everyday San Diegans. And that's why, regardless of what happens with regard to this particular RFP, the city will be relentless, and we will continue forward on driving change on this site.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
I'm replacing Gary Ward covering homelessness.
Right on. Okay. I've seen your face. Okay. So I didn't realize that you